government. An institution created to help govern the people and maintain order in a society. For most of human history, governments have been run by strict hierarchies and monarchies. However, in the modern day, a trend has occurred in which liberal democracies have blossomed and grown to be the most common form of government on Earth, with more than 57% of governments being democratic. However, in this trend, one country has had chances to turn into a functional democracy, but has failed in its transformation: Russia. In this video, I will try to analyze and find an answer to the question of why has Russia in most of its history had a totalitarian style of government? Now I could go all the way back to the Roman Empire, but I'm going to start with the first large nation in Russian lands, the Kievan Rus, and Novgorod in the north around modern-day St. Petersburg. The Kievan Rus was a kind of loose confederation of sorts of different princes across the area from Kiev all the way to the Ural Mountains. This was based in Kiev, in which they took many of their cultural and religious beliefs from Old Testament, Orthodox Christianity, and Byzantine beliefs. However, not all things can last, and in the 13th century the Kievan Rus were invaded by the Mongols, and the state collapsed into its different principalities, leaving Russia fractured for around 100 years. With Mongol rule, the princes had a new concern of making sure to deliver tithe to the Mongols in order to satiate them with stuff like grain and resources. Therefore, in order to keep existing, the princes began to extort more and more from their populace, eventually tying their people to their land in order to squeeze as much productivity as they can so they can help keep up with the tithe. This would become known as serfdom. However, one princely state began to silently reject the Mongol overlords, began to concentrate power for a big plan, a tiny state with a name you might have heard of, Muscovy, or Moscow as is more commonly known today. In the late 1400s, under the rule of Ivan III, the state began to build up itself militarily and was able to beat back the Mongols for the first time in over 100 years. The concentration and cutting of red tape in the state structure allowed it to create a very strong military that began to conquer its neighbors until eventually becoming the largest Russian state since the Kievan Rus. Along with this conquering came a need for a group that could oversee these states, which would fall to the previous princes, in a very subservient position, of course, in which they would not have control of an army, which prevented a type of feudal structure in which the princes and aristocrats tried to wrestle power with the king. There was no point, as if you were rebelling, the king would just send down their armies to reconquer them, and even the church could do nothing about it. And speaking of the church was basically controlled by the state, as Orthodox Christianity is Caesar Papist, wherein the king has power over the pope, in comparison to Catholicism, in which the pope had some power over the king. Therefore, the church was basically used to rubber stamp the Tsar in case they did anything morally gray, or just give them moral correctness whenever the Tsar does anything in particular. As such, the princes and aristocrats maintained very little power in opposition to the state. At first looks, this may have seemed like the destined path, with the princely state beating back the invaders and uniting Russia under their wise rule. However, there was another Russian state of long ago that offered an alternative route that I have mentioned previously in passing, that arose from the ashes of the Kievan Rus, a great power, the city-state of Novgorod. This city offered a wildly different delusion of power, in which residents, freemen, could vote in an assembly known as the Vice to decide who the prince will be, declarations of war, trade deals, alliances, and an archbishop that deals with executive deals. We have a type of three branches situation, long before America, the Enlightenment, all the way dating back to the 13th century? Not only was it politically advanced, but it was also rich, as it had access to the sea, could trade with a variety of German states in the Baltic Sea, and it was the first stop on trading Russian goods with the rest of Europe. Therefore, the question then arises of how could this society fall apart and not rise up to the renowned status of Moscow? War. As Novgorod was a republic and was mostly a trading state, they had no need for a large standing army, as the Kievan Rus at the time and other principalities would basically protect them, because that was more lucrative than anything else they could do with Novgorod. In 1478, when Ivan III of Muscovy was campaigning to unite Russia, they conquered Novgorod. And Moscow cheered as another city was added to their empire, but came the death tolls of a politically diverse Russia, as their choices have been made, and there is no turning back on what Russia would soon become. The major areas of Russia that we know today, excluding Siberia, was conquered in the mid-1500s, and stability seemed high enough that the state would perpetuate itself for a long time with a strong central authority, army, subservient church, and aristocrat that made sure that wealth was being generated no matter the state of the country. This would become the framework that we even see today with Putin, the police, the church, and the oligarchy. However, there were two major opportunities for change in Russia's government. Both were monumental events that you may heard of. The first was the famous Russian Revolution. In a quick summary of this complex event, there were large class disparity, famines, political scandals, unwillingness to change, and a losing world war. This all exploded into the February Revolution, in which the monarchy was dissolved and replaced with a provisional democratic government that didn't do a great job, with the Russian people seeing more of the same instead of a radical change for the better. This discontent within the Russian population bubbled over into the well-known October Revolution, in which the government was overthrown by Bolshevik communists and instituted a civil war between the Bolsheviks and the provisional government. This environment of uncertainty and want for action became prime targets for authoritarian leaders like Stalin and Lenin, who claimed that they could establish order in this, civil war. Similarly, after the fall of the Soviet Union, the population wanted security and an order in an uncertain world. Thus, after the Yeltsin's presidency, which seemed like a failure as before the provisional government, Putin swept in to replace them with a strong government that provided the ability and safety with the factors listed before and right here. In the end, the reasons why Russia keeps failing into authoritarianism is a combination of war, instability, in change, and subservient institutions that make authoritarians supreme in their governing above all others. In the future, some of these factors may change, and a pure democratic Russia can spring forth and breathe new life into what a democratic Russia could be for the East, for its people, and even the world.